Welcome to Windows on the World. Tonight we're going to talk about the latest climate catastrophobia. Yes, the IPCC have released yet another document full of waffle and inaccuracies. And this is quite funny because in 2014 they released a document that they described as the most important document on climate change. This is from the BBC website, and this is the way that they carry on. So now we've got an even more important document on climate change. Is this going to be the definitive document on climate change? No, because the climate's always changing, but the inaccuracies and the actual deceptions within this document are many. We're going to go into that tonight, and we're going to go into what it's all about. But this document from 2014 stated, scientists and officials are meeting in Denmark to edit what's been termed the most important document on climate change. The IPCC synthesis report will summarise the causes and impacts and solutions to rising temperatures. Well, we know what the solutions are, but we don't really get down to what the real causes are. This is also apparent in the new document, so nothing's changed there. Carry on. It will be the bedrock of talks on new global climate deal, right? Which, of course, was the 2015 Paris Agreement. It carries on. Over the past 13 months, the IPCC has released 3 major reports on the physical science, the impacts and the potential methods of dealing with climate change. And on Sunday, they'll release their synthesis report. That was 3 years ago now. So we've got this new document that's come out, which is even more, well, it's kind of waffle really, but also it depends on data which is absolutely flawed and been proven to be flawed, and we're going to get into that later because there's John McLean has just actually looked into their surface temperature data, which is actually laughable. And that is something which I don't think has been brought up in the mainstream, has it? In the mainstream religion. But yeah, the new global governance there we have, there's no need whatsoever for factual information. We don't need that at all. This is once again now been proven with the release of this latest climate catastrophe paper. Just going into my notes here from earlier on. And the threat of the Cold War. This is a very interesting thing, right? Because I was looking at some documentation that I'd written down ages ago from this Russian general, and I've used one of his quotes before because he was absolutely right about what happened with the climate change agenda. He stated that in 1992, when the Rio Earth Summit happened and we were told we were all going to have to change our ways by the billionaire Maurice Strong and of course Al Gore and all these cronies, and the result of that was that nothing happened. So in 2002, at the Johannesburg conference, the banks and multinationals got together and said, we will look after the infrastructure which affects all people if you hand it over to us. And that is apparently what's happened when we look at these regeneration schemes and all this stuff that we talk about all the time that's part of what we call the bigger picture. And we've got, hopefully later on, Sandy Adams and Piers Corbyn, who are speakers in the bigger picture, the touring little roadshow that we're taking around the country, informing, enlivening and amusing people as well as empowering them. And we're also very diverse, of course, because we speak to anybody. Well, I wanted to start the show with something which I think is really interesting, and it was about the structure of the New World Order written many years ago by this Russian General Petrov, who's now dead. But he has a lovely way of putting things, because what he does is he actually defines what the globalist agenda actually is and how it works, because it's not a complicated thing, this, but he lays it out in such a simple way that I'd love to actually go into that first. So he says, like, this is from, you can actually find this video, it's in Russian, and it's called The Structure of the New World Order by General Konstantin Petrov. And he states the slave owners had supervisors and slaves. At some point, the slave owners realised that the best slave is a slave who doesn't even understand that he is a slave. A slave in chains is tempted to escape, and supervisors are needed to make sure that he doesn't escape. Money has to be paid for the supervisors. What can be done so that a slave would work for us voluntarily? A slave needs to be given what he wants, and he wants freedom. Then he won't be a slave. Instead, we will give him the illusion of freedom. This illusion of freedom was realised by people's belief in God. This is how religion is pushed. So I'm not talking about spirituality here, or a belief in something bigger and more powerful, something that is infinite. We're talking about religion. Basically, to brainwash people into thinking that that is their way out. That is their way out to freedom. So when religious faiths later became ineffective, the brainwashing of people was transferred to the plane of ideology. And this is exactly what is happening now. The new ideology has been pushed towards man-made climate change. We're a blight on the planet. The serfs are going to have to destroy themselves, destroy all their rights, and give everything up for the good of the planet. So this is actually what he was talking about. But let's get back to this just to give you this background for tonight's show. So he said the last mighty ideology for brainwashing people was Marxism. In the real social structure in which we live, we are being frightened by different isms like socialism, capitalism, democratism and monarchism, but we continue to live in a global, involuntary civilization. If you look closely at the $1 bill, he says, you will see a pyramid on one side. The top of the pyramid is separate and it's glowing. At the bottom there is an inscription, Novus Ordo Seclorum. This translates as New World Order. Now, most people will know this. This is a thing that's featured in many documentaries about the global conspiracy. But it carries on. This pyramid is the realisation of the structure that exists in every country on the planet. At the top are the slave owners, under them are the supervisors, and at the bottom are the slaves. The retention of people in the pyramid is achieved through dosage of knowledge into the different stratum of society, something we talk about a lot. The old system of governance, the old Prussian system where 1% of the population would be taught to think because the 99% don't. And who's the 99%? Oh, there you go. Ask the people who controlled Occupy. They're the 1%. The 99% are the ones who were controlled, same as in any of these protest movements. The Hegelian dialectic, synthesis, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, which is politically correct narratives and the controlling of all information. So that's the result of the extreme right and the extreme left. There will be the synthesis, and these people are just sitting back, waiting for that to take its course. He carries on, If next to this pyramid you draw a reversed pyramid, that's the pyramid upside down, then you will get the pyramid of knowledge. The people at the top possess the completeness of knowledge. The supervisors are given the factual knowledge, which they need, and that is related to them and their tasks. Those the tasks that they're performing within the structure, they are given enough knowledge to fulfill those tasks and nothing more. That's why people slavishly defend their own ignorance. They want to believe that if something was that important, they would know about it. Well, it is important and they don't know about it. And that's really the whole point of what this is about. One of the results is that patriots walk around and say power to the people. And he carries on. And if they're turned into ordinary workers, these elites, then they will be able to do the job. If an ordinary worker is turned into one of the elite, then he will be able to do the job only if he acquires all the knowledge and this takes time, and this is where knowledge is power. Because if you spend your time wasting it and just doing idle tasks, you will never achieve the knowledge. When the patriots are asked if they know what should be done, they answer that they will figure it out later. They say that they should first get rid of the hated regime, but what next? The pyramid model is realised in the education system, so scientists know only about their speciality, exactly what we're going to be talking about tonight. And a lot of these people who are described as scientists aren't scientists, they're lobbyists. Big difference here, they're the middle management that he's talking about. They know their own job, but if they're together, they don't know what to do. Obviously, they're supervised. If we talk about global politics, we will see that in the global structure, there is a global mafia, and there are countries like Japan, France, Germany, Russia, United States, etc. The global mafia sets tasks for every country in the form of globalization, the concentration of government of the productive forces of the world. How does this look? For example, Japan is about advanced technology, the US is world police, Spain is tourism, Russia is about natural resources. Every country has its role. The global mafia carries out global politics, but the representatives of nations carry out internal and external politics. That is all. So even if a president is smart and he doesn't know about global politics, then he's still a hostage of those who carry out global politics. There used to be two superpowers, he carries on, the USSR and USA. We were frightened with corporatism and they were frightened with communism. In reality, there was a global pyramid in both states. This is getting interesting. What the globalists feared was an understanding between the USA and the USSR on global politics. The globalists didn't want to lose their position, so instead of a two-polar world, they created a multipolar world. In the two-polar world, the USA had an open totalitarian model, and the USSR had a hidden totalitarian model. Both sides had elites, and members of the Politburo lived well too. In the USA it was legal, but in our country, Russia, it was hidden. The globalists solved their problems by legalizing the elite. If you're a Rothschild, a Morgan, an Oppenheimer or Rockefeller, you don't have your own armed forces and Ministry of Finance. So, the globalists govern the world in a different way, by making others do what they need. What they feared is an understanding between the US and the USSR that they're being tricked by the global mafia. They pitted the two states against one another and made profits from the Cold War. Transnational corporations sold arms and created conflicts, but this eventually created a two-polar world. So the globalists solved this problem by breaking up the two superpowers. They broke up the USSR like an Autovaz plant, and they will break up the USA like a Ford plant. They are also planning the collapse of Russia into even smaller states, and I am telling you that a map of a divided America was released, and the USA is gradually being turned into an evil empire. The USSR was ruined by opposing countries, people and religions. It's the same thing with the USA, and you probably know that it goes on about the Farrakhan movement, but this can now be translated as Antifa and the Soros-funded groups. So this guy is absolutely spot on with what he's saying. I just missed that next bit out because we've now moved on to a different level with all this. He was talking about these sort of groups about 10 years ago. He carries on. The divide and conquer strategy is being implemented so that the globalists, who are the owners of transnational banks and corporations, can continue governing the world. All this is being presented as the move from a two-polar world to the multipolar world. So he carries on. Many people think that anti-globalists are the good guys, but the horror is the anti-globalists are the instrument of the globalists. Well, we've just proved that, haven't we? That's exactly what's going on. Very, very prophetic what he was saying here, but not really, because this guy was high up in government and even had his own political party. He died in 2009. You can look him up, General Konstantin Petrov, but I'll carry on till I finish it, because they don't have anything to do. This is great. Because they don't have anything to do, the anti-globalists gather in some city to protest, but someone has to guide them and someone has to provide them with money. Mr. Soros. Now this is very, very relevant to now. This is why I'm reading it out. So why do globalists need anti-globalists? Well, they are creating a multipolar world with numerous countries and nationalities so that everyone can do their own thing, but within this structure. So it's totally the Hegelian dialectic. So I think that's a really interesting way to start the show, because it just lays things out simply. That's exactly what we're looking at here. And that's exactly what the climate change religion is all about. Yeah, I'm just looking at what's in chat, and that's great. We've got people commenting, and yeah, I can see it. The usual intense conversation and witticisms. That's great stuff. So, let's have a look at the first global revolution. This is actually where the climate change agenda came from. And it was the President Emeritus of the Club of Rome, Alexander King, and the Secretary General, Bertrand Snyder, offered both a warning and an approach to a possible solution to world problems. Now, this is called the First Global Revolution, and Sandy puts this into her part of the talk. We can talk about that later on, but this was basically a kickstart to how they were going to use a global warming or climate change agenda to control population. So, yes, it says here, this is their quote, which you can find online. In 1993, the club published the First Global Revolution. According to this book, divided nations require common enemies to unite them. Either a real one or else one invented for the purpose. Because of the sudden absence of traditional enemies, new enemies must be identified. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention, and it is only through changed attitudes and behaviour that they can be overcome. The real enemy then is humanity itself, which is exactly what this show is about. It's all about us being put into this level of serfdom, smart cities, surveillance, closing off of the countryside, loss of travel rights and being restricted, and also radiated by the new 5G network. All of this is a benefit under sustainable development, folks. So, the solution that they're talking about is actually depopulation. And we talk about, well, it's global warming. Well, it was cooling before it was global warming. The ice caps are melting, now they're growing back again, depending on the time of year. So it doesn't matter, because if it's repeated often enough, the fear will be cumulative. That's the point. So it doesn't matter whether these IPCC documents are in any way accurate or they actually say anything. They keep repeating them and they get put on the news. And the useful idiot newsreaders read the script and say, help, we need to do something. So this is a little quote that I really like, that's actually, I put in my talk now. It's by Charles Sullivan, author and philosopher. He said, we allow the most atrocious lies uttered by political and moral prostitutes to go unchallenged. These lies are endlessly recycled in the commercial media until they become ingrained in the public conscience as truth. Here's one from Bertrand Russell, and he should know, or he did know. Most of the greatest evils that man has inflicted upon man have come through people feeling quite certain about something which, in fact, was false. And I think that ties into what we're talking about as well. And he's a man who knew a lot about how propaganda works. I would say an expert in propaganda. So this show will look at the latest Catastrophobia for Kids document released by the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, whose data and projections have never come true and have been properly debunked for the last 20 years. Yet the repeaters in the press keep repeating the biggest and most profitable lie that humans are causing their own extinction by breathing and producing energy. And of course, what this is actually creating is humans actually wishing for their own extinction, which is the idea. And the idea came out of the Club of Rome in 1969 as a management concept. And that's all this is, a management concept. So, Sustainable cities to protect the farmland. We talked about that with the Habitat conferences. Check out Habitat conferences online. Anyone who thinks this is in any way a conspiracy theory, please do have a look at that. They're biannual, these conferences, and we've played what these people have to say. And basically, they talk about the solution, which is poverty for all. That's actually what the solution's going to be. Also, we've got a quote here from Ottmar Edenhofer, the world expert. Oh, he's a world expert. We have a lot of those, don't we? He's an IPCC panellist. Well, that actually makes him less than a world expert, I would suggest. And he's director of the Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons. That's a good one, isn't it? Global Commons. We hear a lot about this, the common good. That means everybody has to be brought down to the same level, poverty under a ruling elite. That's all it is. It's very simple. So here was what he said in 2010. One must say clearly that we redistribute de facto the world's health by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore. I would go further than that now and say it's got nothing to do with it. So let's go into the SR15 document, the special report from the IPCC. So after pages of repetitive generalizations and statements which were not backed up by any proof, and I've just read a load of it, so I'm saying that with some authority, and I've put it into the chat there if any of you guys want to look at it, but you seem to be quite happy chatting amongst yourselves, so feel free to carry on doing that. So so the AR5 IPCC 2014, this is in their introduction, which is the last load of waffle that they put out to frighten us, which I referred to at the beginning of the show, concluded that climate change constrains possible development paths, that synergies and trade-offs exist between climate responses and socio-economic contexts. What they're trying to say in that load of meaningless waffle is that it's about controlling society. And that opportunities, it carries on, for effective climate responses overlap with opportunities for sustainable development. Oh, that's a coincidence, isn't it? How could that possibly be that the climate change constraints that have to be imposed somehow go along with this global action plan, which they're actually telling us has nothing to do with the climate? Interesting, that one, isn't it? Let's just read you this. A lovely giveaway. Noting that many existing societal patterns of consumption are intrinsically unsustainable. Well, that actually means anything that's not walking or cycling and being locked in a tiny apartment which you will never pay for and being radiated by the new 5G, which is being imposed on everybody. So let's have a look. It means not owning a car, a house, or even having electric. This is an interesting one. Check out our Green Energy Agenda Explained video where we met the UK's energy suppliers who look after the national grid when it's at capacity. They clearly stated that the future is power cuts, and power cuts disempower people and businesses. Remember, this is not about an economic model that is sustainable for the public. It's about the idea of artificial scarcity and rationing and the fact, according to them, that we're a blight on the planet. So there you go. There is no single answer, it carries on, to the question of whether it is feasible to limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade and adapt to the consequences. The Hadley Centre for Climate Prediction and Research is the biggest influence on the UN Global Action Plan, and their data has been fundamentally flawed and a completely unreliable source of data. Professor Chris Foland, Hadley Centre for Climate Prediction and Research, here's a quote from him. Here's a quote from their preferred partners, basically. Professor Chris Foland stated, "The data doesn't matter. We're not basing our recommendations on the data. We're basing them on the climate models." Well, that's actually really good because the data that they have submitted for this report has been taken apart by someone called John McLean. And he stated that their surface data temperature models are wildly inaccurate, absolutely wildly inaccurate, because they are in places where the accuracy cannot be confirmed. In other words, things that are meant to be out to sea are inland. There are weather stations that closed down years ago which were still taking data years later. There are places which were in the middle of nowhere which were now in the middle of built-up urban areas due to sustainable development, no doubt. You need to read this document. It's on Joanne Nova, it's called, and it's just put it in. It's John McLean challenges the IPCC, and the data that they're using is laughable. So let's have a look at what the UN Global Diversity Assessment said in 1995. This is interesting. The assessment concludes that the Earth's biological resources are under serious threat. The damage being done today, largely as a result of human activities, you're all to blame for this, will limit the range of options that people will have in the future. There you go. They're just telling you what it is. It's artificial scarcity and rationing for all. Now that future is loss of rights to a consensus based on a lie. That lie is used to control and manage population. So blame is attributed to religions for being in denial of the sacred attributes of nature, i.e. global warming or climate change. The living and non-living, plants, animals and rocks are a community. So a pile of rocks can be a community, and this is why they're creating nature reserves and rewilding, because what they're saying is that everything has the same rights. So a group of rocks can become a community, and if perchance they decide to make a certain species rare and reintroduce it, then we're not going to be allowed on that land. It's very, very simple to implement this stuff. So whenever you see nature reserves, new nature reserves, that merely means that at some point they're going to be closed off to us. Now, our rights to walk in the countryside and enjoy nature are going to be vastly reduced under Agenda 21. That's the whole idea of it. So you can see our article, New Age Global Governance, for more on the background of this corporate management of all resources and people. So it's like massive restriction on travel and rights of access to natural habitat, and restricted by labelling them conservation areas and these nature reserves. Yes, absolutely key points these. Massive restriction on travel rights. Rewilding means reintroducing dangerous animals. Children or adults will be allegedly attacked by them, and the areas will be closed off for the wildlife only. That is the plan. So here are some interesting and revealing quotes which back up our research from the latest UN and IPCC document. SR15, which has been driven home relentlessly to all those who sit and watch PR agencies repeating PR statements which masquerade as journalists reading news. You know, there's people on the BBC and Sky News and pretty much all of the other ones. We have a system of different points of view, but one agenda here. So it says ethical considerations and the principle of equity in particular are central to this report. Oh, so they're now saying what our ethical considerations are. We're not really talking about real ethics here. We're going to get onto real ethics in a minute. And if you want to see real ethics in science, go to geoethic.com. geoethic.com, ethical scientists. Why have you never heard of this? Why has this ethical scientific body of people never been on a mainstream news? Well, we know why. That's the whole purpose of the climate catastrophobia religion. Yeah, so it says here, it goes on about 1.5 degrees centigrade. This is the impact of warming up to and beyond 1.5 degrees centigrade, and some potential impacts of mitigation actions. What we're talking about here is really they're just giving themselves an excuse for mitigation actions, which are required to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Now, that can't be done with any actual real accuracy, and it can't be done anyway because we can't control the weather unless we use manipulation techniques, which we've talked about and which they talk about. However, their climate data is so inaccurate they can't possibly measure this. They can't possibly measure 1.5 degrees, because if you look at the anomalies in what they've put out, we're talking about 30 or 40 degree differences. It's absolutely ridiculous. So it says the Paris Agreement associates the principle of equity with the broader goals of poverty eradication and sustainable development, recognizing that effective responses to climate change require a global collective effort that may be guided by the 2015 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The report focuses on climate resilient development pathways. is that a bit like the Liverpool care pathway, I think? Yeah. Development pathways. Pathways into oblivion for the human race is what they're talking about. Ultimately, population reduction. Carries on, which aim to meet the goals of sustainable development, including climate adaptation and mitigation, poverty eradication, and reducing inequalities. What they mean by that is social equity and social justice, which means the taking away of your rights. So, reducing inequality, yes. Restriction and loss of rights and global taxation and poverty for all. So let's have a look at their executive summary now, right? This chapter frames the context, knowledge base and assessment approaches used to understand the impacts of 1.5 degrees centigrade global warming above pre-industrial levels and related global greenhouse gas emission pathways, building on the IPCC Fifth Assessment Report AR5. Now, all of that sounds very waffly, and all right, some people may say it sounds worthy, but have you read the AR5? Have you read the AR4? None of these models and predictions have come true or are ever likely to. It says, in the context of strengthening the global response to the threat of climate change, sustainable development and efforts to eradicate poverty. This is what they keep pushing. The sustainable development is control and management of all infrastructure which affects people on the planet. That means that you are going to be put into human settlement zones. And these zones are high density. By 2050, the UN want 2/3 of all the world's population living in controlled cities with their sustainable development goals. And read what those are, and then read what they are translated as, because this is a kind of Orwellian speak, an Orwellian language. It's a little bit like the terminology used in Clockwork Orange. In fact, it's a bit like the terminology used to Occupy by the change agents who took that over. When something kicked off there or someone got aggressive, they sent for the tranquility team. Things are getting out of hand. Bring in tranquility. It sounds like a dystopian nightmare. And newsflash, it is. So anything outside this propaganda statement is a threat to so-called sustainable development. So sovereignty, free will, freedom to travel, freedom to be self-employed, freedom to maybe like to have some land that you'd like to live on is not sustainable. Okay? That's the main point here. So this is the context, and context is everything as far as this goes. So yeah, I'll just read out what this General Petrov said, actual verbatim, as the result of the Rio summit in '92, when nothing happened. On the Johannesburg conference in 2002, the heads of international banks and multinational corporations made this ultimatum: we will solve all problems of rich and poor countries if you submit to us undivided possession of all infrastructure that ensures the livelihood of people. Think about that. Because the whole point of this agenda is control. And this is exactly what's happened. The infrastructure was sold off to developers who have turned cities into corporate hives of surveilled and controlled human resources. See our show on the Habitat conferences. It's called Global Local Feudal System Unmasked. And this is not what I think. This is what's been imposed through the UN and the IPCC into all these lobbying groups. And all of these absolutely helpless and mentally helpless individuals who have groupthink, who think that the polar ice caps are melting and we're going to be 20 foot or 50 foot underwater. And I know people who think like this, I'm ashamed to say. And when you see what they actually believe with no actual knowledge of what they're talking about, you know how this pyramid system of indoctrination and education for the few works. It's quite clear. So, yes, we've also got another one called Climate Change, Trial and Mini Ice Age. Have a look at that one. That's very interesting. And also, before I bring on one of our contributors, the Oregon Petition. Has anyone heard of the Oregon Petition? It was 31,000 486, probably more, scientists have signed a document called the Oregon Petition, lambasting the shoddy research behind global warming, stating any human contribution to climate change has not been demonstrated. That's a fact. It's not been demonstrated. This research by scientists was denounced by the likes of Snopes. Oh, Snopes. Well, they're a worthy gatekeeping source, aren't they? And Wikipedia. Now, I would suggest that this is just my opinion, but based on my research, which has been quite extensive, I would never use Wikipedia as a source. Go to the next source down, which is usually a specialist source, because Wikipedia, even pages that I've been involved with, organisations that have been described on Wikipedia, have been absolutely subverted, and we've been able to do nothing about it. Wikipedia is part of a problem. It's a part of a problem, a bit like the UN and the IPCC, who they rabidly support. So let's get back to this SR15 document. It states, human-induced warming reached approximately 1 degree centigrade. Plus 0.2 degrees centigrade is the likely range, it says, above pre-industrial levels in 2017. Well, wait a minute, they've been saying this for rather a long time, increasing at 0.2%, which they could not possibly measure with their surface data models. That's impossible. So that is not my opinion, that's a fact. It says global warming is defined in this report as an increase in combined surface air and sea surface temperatures averaged over the globe in a 30-year period. Unless otherwise specified, warming is expressed relative to the period 1850 to 1900, used as an approximation of pre-industrial temperatures in AR5. Read that, read it and weep, probably with laughter, when you understand what they're saying. It says warming greater than the global average has already been experienced in many regions. Well, yes, but you can't generalise about this stuff because the climate is always changing. It says over land higher than over the ocean. And it says with high confidence. They put with high confidence in. High confidence doesn't mean anything, does it? Anyone can be confident and wrong. Most land regions are experiencing greater warming than the global average, while most ocean regions are warming at a slower rate. A warming greater than 1.5 degrees centigrade is therefore not geophysically unavoidable. Whether it will occur depends on future rates of emission reductions. Well, it doesn't. It doesn't depend on that at all if you look at the actual data. So, Dr. John McLean. Now, this is from joannova.com.au. Audit of global temperature data finds freezing tropical islands, boiling towns, and boats which are on land. Okay, I kid you not. Dr. John McLean says, what were they thinking? Datagate. First ever audit of global temperature data finds freezing tropical islands, boiling towns and boats on land. It seems like neither organisation properly checked the land or sea temperature data before using it in the HADCRUT dataset, which is the Hadley Research Centre dataset. If it had been checked, then the CRU might have queried the more obvious errors in data supplied by different countries. The Hadley Centre might also have found some of the inconsistencies in the sea surface temperature data, along with errors that it created itself when it copied data from the handwritten logs of some Royal Navy ships. So it goes on, and there's more to it which we can get into, and then we're going to get into the Porto conference. In the meantime, I'm going to try and get Piers Corbyn online now, and hopefully then we'll be joined by Sandy Adams. So I'm going to give Piers a quick call because he's not available on Skype. I'm going to call him on his office landline. This is Weather Action we're calling here, weatheraction.com. And Piers Corbyn is now engaged, so we can't talk to him. So we're going to go to Sandy Adams, who's actually a contributor to our talks. And Sandy talks all about Agenda 21. So we're going to phone up Sandy Adams, and hopefully Sandy's going to answer the phone. Hello, Sandy.
Hello, hi.
Hi, let me just turn you up. You've gone a bit quiet.
Is that better?
That's a lot better. So,
Great.
what were your initial responses to that rather long intro?
Well, it's what it is really. I mean, I think there's this whole thing going on with the IPCC putting out fake, all this fake.
Well, absolutely, and it's provably fake data. This is the thing; it's provably fake. Now, this John McLean, I'll go through some of this stuff with you and just get your reaction. So let's just see. There's quite a lot of this stuff here, but he says, "Right, ingredient temperature of the world's average." Yes, it may. Okay. Right, he says in May 1861, the global coverage, according to the grid system method that the HADCRUT-4 uses, was 12%. That means that no data was reported from almost 90% of the Earth's surface. So they're saying this is global when it's actually only 12%, and that 12% is grossly inaccurate.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the data is totally flawed. And they're pushing this out as though, I'm only looking at the papers this week, about, London's going to be under, so many feet of water. I mean, how can they put that stuff out? It's absolute rubbish.
Well, the New York Times have been saying it for ages, and the New York Times reported that New York Harbour was going to be underwater, and actually that properties on the harbour were sinking. Well, actually, they were saying that the actual water level was rising, but as I just stated, I preempted it, the property's actually sinking because they've overbuilt on it.
They've overbuilt on it, exactly.
Yeah.
The land is sinking. The water level isn't rising.
That's it, exactly. Yes.
Mad.
And that is saying this. Despite this, it's said to be a global average. So they're taking 12% of the Earth's surface data, which is incorrect, and they haven't responded to the other 90% of the Earth's surface. That's the sort of that's the mild error that they've made. That's the number one error, which I don't think any of the mainstream media have reported on at all, and anybody can read this stuff. Anybody can read it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this huge push at the moment to get the public on board with all this, and it's going out. It's total propaganda. It's going out in every area of the media, be it television, newspapers, radio, whatever. And it's based on an absolute lie, and this is just, people are believing this because we're being saturated with false data, really.
Absolutely. So he carries on. The fate of the planet is at stake, but the key temperature data set used by climate models contains more than 70 different sorts of problems. Trillions of dollars have been spent because of predictions based on this data, yet even the most basic quality control checks have not been done. Thanks to Dr. John McLean, we see how the IPCC demands for cash rest on freak data, empty fields, Fahrenheit temperatures recorded as Celsius, mistakes in longitude and latitude, brutal adjustments and even spelling errors. Why wasn't this done years ago? So much for that facade. How can people who care about the climate be so sloppy and amateur with the data? Because they don't care about the climate. That's the point, isn't it, Sandy?
No, they don't care about the climate at all. I mean, what they really want is just they're using this to get global control, and that's what we've got to be aware of. It's got absolutely nothing to do with climate.
That's absolutely correct. And now we're going to get into geoethic.com. Now, these are a group of scientists who have filmed. You can look at our banned climate conference, goes ahead on YouTube and Windows on the World with a write-up, and you will see in there scientists, even people who dive to the bottom of the very deep oceans and look at data, and have been doing for over 30 years. And these people are often very bamboozled by what's happening, because the fellow who put that conference on originally put it on at UCL. He was a lecturer at University College, and University College turned around and said, well, as you don't believe in global warming and you're not with the consensus, this is an embarrassment to us and we don't want it here. In fact, I'm paraphrasing, but you can hear what the actual letter to him said. And this fellow was so shocked He didn't know what to do. And this is it, because these people are actual scientists, and they're giving real data. And the science is all about debate. How can the science ever be settled? Science can never be settled. Oh, it can be settled in terms of climate science then, but not in any other way. And then, of course, you've got these useful idiots like Brian Cox, who knows nothing about climate science, who we've challenged to a debate. And people go along with it because he's a fluffy, wet individual who just nods his head. And it's a bit like, I suppose it's like you'd get, all right, Gary Lineker was good at football. This guy I don't think's ever been good at anything, unless you can prove it. But it's the same thing. They just spout this nonsense and go on television. And the way he threw that graph... He threw that graph at Malcolm Roberts. He threw a graph at Malcolm Roberts as though it was proving what Malcolm Roberts, who's a member of this political party in Australia, who's actually been up against the Australian government with this stuff, with Tony Heller, a real climate scientist who you can follow as Steve Goddard on Twitter. And he's constantly debunking this stuff. So he said, Piers is now saying ring again. So I'll call him in a few minutes. But this is the thing, you see. They had this Porto conference, these scientists, and they looked at the driver. They call it this piece drivers and fare dodgers. In other words, drivers of climate change. They call it drivers and fare dodgers. Unanimously, all the assembled scientists put the human emitted CO2 on the back seat of the climate mobile. No one supported in any way the hysteria in media and politics to reduce this assumed threat propelled by the IPCC political papers and lobbies behind dominant media releases. Considering the quantity of water vapour in atmosphere, which is the most dominant greenhouse player on Earth, with about 20% of the present gases, CO2, representing roughly only 7%. So basically, water vapour is 94% of natural origin, and only 6% out of anthropogenic, meaning human, and genic, meaning origin, right? That's a bit of a mouthful. Yeah. But consumption of fossil energy and other consumptions contribute only 18 parts per million of 410 parts per million of all CO2 in the atmosphere from sea level up to 24,000 feet, actually. Up to 24,000 feet. Or 1 out of 2,500 particles in the atmosphere. So the main driver of atmospheric gases is water vapour, and CO2 of human consumption is negligible. Thus the consensus, Gervais Hard, same observation and conclusions for the already passed... Hang on a minute. Yeah, just that's Mr. Corbyn trying to get through, so I think I should give him a call, because we can get into this as he's on the line. So, Sandy, can I just get on to Piers now?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
okay, yeah. Okay, now we're going to call Mr. Corbyn. Our main contributors here don't actually have Skype, or they're in places where they haven't got Skype. So I'm just going to call Mr. Corbyn's office, and hopefully he'll join us now. So, no, he's on the phone again. So that's... no good at all. Okay, right. So water vapour and CO2 have minimum 3 very beneficial properties. They protect the Earth from cooling, otherwise temperatures on Earth would drop to a unlivable minus 20 degrees Celsius. So, in other words, water vapour and CO2 are very beneficial, and they protect us from cooling. And without these, the Earth's temperature would fall to an unlivable minus 20 degrees Celsius. Now, you can live in minus 20 degrees, but not very well. They act as a thermal cushion. Second, they protect our life and that of the plants and animals from solar and cosmic overradiation like Polaroid sunglasses. Third, they assure proper growing of all the green plant life on Earth. Without CO2, no photosynthesis, no growth of plants below 150 parts per million. So we're actually in a reasonably good situation with the amount of CO2, but we could do with a lot more. So if you want to see some real science, go to the geoethic.com website. And I'm now going to try Mr. Corbyn once again to see if we can get through. Let's see if weather action is available. So let's have a look. Carbon dating is flawed, says Lee. Anything dated over 50,000 years has no more carbon in it. Yeah, well, these are good points. I mean, if we look at some of these things in chat, Martin Houston says, yeah, CO2 is great for plants. Good that we are unlocking some of the fossil carbon, so much of the rest is stuck in rocks like chalks and limestone. Yeah, interesting thing about fossil fuels is they're not made out of fossils. So oil is found at depths of 40,000 feet, and it's not a fossil fuel. In fact, when you think about it, well, do have a think about it and come up with your own conclusions, then do some research. But, of course, the whole of this and everything, every controlled protest movement, such as this fracking thing with these 3 fracking protesters been put in prison while they're banging on about climate change, and all of this controlled opposition stuff have been covering for years, and it ties into what we say at the beginning of the show, the Hegelian dialectic. The Hegelian dialectic of basically thesis, antithesis into synthesis. So that's really been the point of the whole show, and I hope that all of that information will be able to sink in. And do have a look at the IPCC reports, because anybody can read them. They're not written scientifically. They're written in a way which is absolutely very, very repetitive and meaningless. But I'll just get you to finish off, Sandy, if that's okay. Are you there?
Yeah. I'm here.
Yeah. So,
I'm sorry.
what did you make of the information that we've put out tonight?
Well,
and you need to turn me off in the background.
I'm turning this off now. Sorry. I was just turning. There we go.
Oh right, I'm calling you.
Yeah, I'm on a delay here. Yeah, I mean, the whole Porto thing just smashes that out of the water, really, with the truth that without CO2, trying to reduce CO2 to zero, well, then nothing would live. I mean, it's an absolute nonsense. And I've just been looking at the Club of Rome report, the first global revolution, and we're talking about Brian Cox and people, useful idiots like that, and with the Club of Rome report that this was actually written sort of anywhere between the 1960s and it actually they republished it in 1991, and it says all the measures or the equivalent cannot be implemented unless the public is well informed and understands the consequences of inaction. It is necessary, therefore, that concepts of global development, including the issues in industrialisation, be integrated into educational programs to include instruction on environmental protection, energy and resource saving, the preservation of cultural values and many other aspects. We therefore call on UNESCO, ministers of education, parents, associations, television authorities and others to undertake this essential task. So they've created it. It really is a Hegelian thing. They've created the problem, and this is the solution. And the reaction is what's happening now.
Yes,
and it's all been very well thought out, and it's a huge propaganda machine.
Yeah, well, in actual fact, it's actually very simple, because what we do in the talks, we take this apart for what it is, a management concept. If you want to manage things, you have to invent, basically, an apocalypse or an impending disaster. This is how apocalyptic religions have controlled people for thousands of years. So there's nothing new in this. Yeah. It's just an updated model which fits in with the soundbite world that we live in. So in other words, when they throw out these mantras like 99% of scientists agree, which is not true when it's 0.3% when you actually look at it, then the public just repeat it. And this is the thing about propaganda and television training, because whether people believe what's coming out of the television or not, if they keep it on in the background, it's having an effect. That mantra that is repeated to them all the time is having an effect. I mean, I was talking to someone in Kent, actually, and they were saying that part of the coastline here is going to be a nature reserve, and they're going to use the earth, which they're going to dig out of a tunnel, which is going to be the new Dartford tunnel, right, from where the Dartford Bridge is, which is the extortion bridge at the moment.
Yeah.
And well, extortion because Marston's charge you £450 if you don't pay your £2.50. I think I've just got one of those in the post because I paid 24 hours late, and now they're saying I've got a fine. But I do actually encourage mass non-compliance. This is my opinion. I'm not saying that everyone should do it, but in my opinion, that bridge was paid for in 2003. That's not my opinion, that is a fact. But in my opinion, it's an absolute looting scam by a French company called Sanef, who control the toll roads in France. That's a side issue, but something that I feel quite strongly about as I drive over that bridge, which I paid for. Well, I didn't pay for it, but the public paid for it in 2003. So the fact that Marston's can steal your car in 2018 tells you that something's very wrong with our system of governance, or very right with our system of governance, depending on who you believe. Because the system of governance, the one we're under, the one I've described earlier on, is very, very simple. It's childishly simple. It's people who've taken it upon themselves to run things, and because they have a particular point of view and they are very clever at social engineering, everybody else thinks that we live in some sort of democracy, which of course is not true. So it's very simple, this stuff. It's basically psychological subversion in a really easy to figure out way once you do a bit of research. And I'm going to actually carry on maybe tonight. I'm going to finish this show in a couple of minutes, but I think I'm going to go live again. So if anyone wants to stay in chat, we might have a secondary show coming up in about 15 minutes with Mr. Corbyn, if I can get hold of him. He sent me a message. He has problems with his landline, but that's a side issue. It's got nothing to do with this show. So in summing up, we're going to be doing some more talks in the near future. Keep looking at winnersontheworld.net. There's several more coming up, and we're going to be doing our daily talks. The one in Bristol was very successful. The idea of this is that people go out and organise their own talks in their own little areas. We can come along, have some fun as well, because the thing is about this agenda is that once you realise what it is, then you can look at it in a different way. You can start being objective. In other words, start thinking like the people who are imposing it. Have you got anything to say to that, Sandy, in conclusion?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you're noticing something that doesn't seem right, and there's an awful lot that isn't right at the moment, within, globally, locally, everything, you just question it. And you'll usually find that it comes right back to the Global Action Plan, to sustainable development, because it's being implemented in every single area of your life. And, it's hard to describe this. Is it, whether it's a planning issue or some kind of issue with something within your local council, or it could be property rights, it could be anything. You'll probably find that you will definitely find it boils right back to United Nations Sustainable Development.
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely correct. And that is the bigger picture. That's what we talk about. That's why we call it the bigger picture, because we're not thinking small. To actually counter this, it's a pyramid up, pyramid down thing. So the pyramid going up from the bottom is the knowledge, and they've got all the knowledge at the top in the inverted pyramid, and they've got the power in the upright pyramid, because they're the keystone at the top, and everything else is underneath them. The useful idiots are underneath them, and they enforce it all for them. It's very, very simple. It's just there's nothing new about this system of governance, which is why I went into what I did at the beginning of the show when I talked about the Russian General Konstantin Petrov and his views of how the world was being run. And I think that those sort of simplistic ways of laying it out are incredibly important. So that's it for tonight's show. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm going to be back in 15 minutes if anyone wants to stay in chat. I'll be back at 1:15 with Mr. Corbyn. So thanks a lot, Sandy, and we'll see you all soon on Windows on the World.
Okay, bye.